So today's date is June 17th, and this class is Exploring Jewish Views of the Afterlife, traditional and practical dimensions, or something like that. And somebody needs to mute themselves. Who's that? Okay, I think it was you, Tehila. You're bringing in a lot of noise. This is a class on afterlife and the renewal of Jewish death rituals, practical wisdom for today, and it's June 17th. And I am Reb Simcha Raphael, and this is the third class in a series on exploring Jewish views of the afterlife. And we're just gathering our community here, and I'm letting in some more people. And welcome as you're coming in. Okay, and Alice is on the beach somewhere. We can see that. Now, with you, actually, I don't know whether it's a virtual background or whether that's the real scene where you are in Hawaii.
It's a virtual background, but I was there this morning paddling, so.
That's great. That is great. Okay. And I already started to record. You should know that.
I see that, yes.
Thank you.
Stephanie was on earlier, and she encouraged me to start recording early, and she'll edit out this part.
Okay.
So we'll see who shows up today. Got a few more people.
Board.
Okay, welcome.
And this is a three-part class on Jewish views of the afterlife, traditional and contemporary perspectives. And today we're talking about afterlife and Kabbalistic tradition, post-mortem journey.
Alice, you were playing that.
I'm doing this under the auspices of Aleph Alai.
I have to keep muting you. You're playing that. Hello, Lori.
How do?
Remind me where you are.
Missoula, Montana.
Right. I think I once.
Hi, Chaya.
I think I once applied for a job at that.
Hi, Lori.
Yeah?
It's good to see you.
Yeah. We know each other from being students at the same time in Aleph.
Yay.
I'm Merle. Okay.
Reb Simcha, I just wanted to let you know that it's completely fortuitous that literally the day after my Beit Midrash class asked to talk about this series on the afterlife, that I saw the publicity from Aleph for your class. So it was really a beautiful conjunction of interests, and I thank you. So I actually reprised some of your lesson last week about the Kabbalistic cycle of the body and embodiment, and I plugged you. So I want you to know.
Well,
the word's out in Montana.
On my website, under resources, is a link called article. So I'm not sure exactly where it is on the website, but I have a whole series of texts, like copies of the text that I use and other ones. So if you're going to continue teaching, there's stuff available.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we do what we did last time? Just write where you are. So if you go to rename, you can, that way when we see who this community is.
I just had a question before we start.
Yeah. Was that Chaya? Was that your question?
No, it was me. Sorry, Tehila.
Yeah.
Are you available for contacting outside of this class?
You know what? I made a note saying if you need to talk to record it, and if you need to talk to me later, contact me. You can't read my Yeah, so you can reach me. I'll give you my email now, but you can also reach me through our website. Now, where's
You don't have to put it because I'm on the phone. I don't have access to the chat. I'll just find you.
you'll find me?
I'll find you.
If you can write where you are,
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
Missoula, Miami.
You have to change your name on this screen
Where
there.
you go
Click on your
to where
name.
the three dots to the right of your screen of your little square, and you click on it and it'll say rename. Okay. All right, let's see. I think we're up to 13, 14. I think our list was a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. No, we still have 27 people. And then it's just 4 o'clock. I just put in my email, and it's my domain is @institute.net, and that is also my website. So there's contact information through there. Where's the healer? I've asked people are just getting in. If you can put where you are, that way we'll see our community of the whole. And welcome. If you're just getting in, someone named iPhone has arrived. If you're able to put add to your name where you're from, there, Tahila, you figured it out. Your technology repertoire is growing by the minute for all of us. Okay, when are we up to? Where's participants? 19. I'm still going to wait a little bit longer. I think today I'm going to share the reading. I'm going to just let people jump in. I like the diversity of voices. Hello there, Aggie. I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you. You're in there twice. Yeah. So I want to say this now, and if I remember, I'll say it again. I realize that in doing this teaching, sometimes it could be evocative of emotional responses, and we're teaching, I'm doing a class, I'm not doing a group. So I want to be responsive to people's needs. And if you need to check back in with me after the class or reach me, feel free to do that. So I am available. I just want you to know that. Okay, one more minute and then we're if you just got in more recently, if you can indicate where you're from, we'll know where you're from, and if you don't, we won't. Okay, I think we're close to a full house. I could not open any of the download material. I was asked for a, let me see if I can find it and put it in here. Okay, I've just sent the download material as a PDF. I sent it to just to one person. Let me send it to everyone now. Okay. All right. We're ready to go. And so I want to welcome all of you here and appreciate your persistence. I recognize that we're all a little bit ausgezumt, but it's my intention to make sure you are well educated and entertained and do a combination of speaking from the speaker view and the shared screen and make room for conversation as we go along. So just to put it in the context of what we're doing here today, this is the third class in this series, and this is what we're Afterlife and the Renewal of Jewish Death Rituals. And I'll tell you what, before I even say more about what I'm going to do, let's have everybody unmute themselves. And no, actually, I don't have my bracha for Torah study here. For some reason, I spaced it out. So let me unshare my screen. Wait, where did we go? I'm having a little bit of technological issues here. Okay, stop share. Okay. All right. So let's do the bracha for Torah study together, and unmute yourself and let's hear the cacophony of sounds, and hold in your heart again somebody that you're thinking of, or some buddies that you're thinking of that you want to say, may the zchut, may the merit of our learning be for the sake of your neshama. So unmute yourself and join me together as we say the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher Holy One of blessing, you give us this opportunity to soak in these words of Torah. Amen, amen, amen. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, which goes like this. Simcha, you talk up a lot about life after death, but what am I supposed to do with all of that? You know, I want to give you a blessing that whatever I'm teaching here today, you don't have any use for. You know, it's what am I saying? I'm saying, you know, we want to avoid the reality of having to deal with death. You know, I can bet that it's not going to necessarily happen that way. You know, I want to say, I hope you don't need it for a long time to come. But the question I ask is, if consciousness survives bodily death, okay, how does that change the way we think about dying and the deathbed and funeral and Shiva and Kaddish and Yizkor and Yortzeit? So that's really what I want to do today. I want to kind of raise that question based on what we looked at, particularly last week in the Kabbalistic tradition, but even the biblical rabbinic tradition. If Jews believe in survival of consciousness after death, which is really what I'm saying to you, when we have an encounter with a loved family member who is close to the end of their life, or when we're in the middle of preparing for a funeral, when it happens, and it happens, or if we're sitting Shiva or mourning somebody and saying Kaddish or Yisker or Yortzeit, how does Afterlife help us with that? Okay, so that's kind of what I want to do today. And I have to say, I wrote my dissertation, which was the background for writing the book, in the late 70s, early 80s. Actually, from 80 to 86, I worked on it. And then my first job, as soon as I got my PhD, was resident psychologist in a Jewish funeral home. There's nobody here from Toronto. There was somebody here from Winnipeg today. So I was resident psychologist in a funeral home in Toronto. And
I'm from Toronto.
you're from Toronto. Okay, well, there you
Yes.
go.
Which funeral home?
Benjamin's.
Oh, wow.
Michael Benjamin hired me. And
Wow.
so I had written all of this stuff. I'd read all these books. And I remember dealing with a woman. I was sitting like 4 feet from where she was on the couch, and right behind her on the couch was the balcony that her son Nishdugadak had jumped off of 48 hours earlier. Or I was in the presence with a rabbi and a husband and wife, and the mother was holding in her arms a child a Sid's birth that she was going to be giving to the funeral director for burial. And I learned a lot by the seat of my pants. So the first thing I learned, are there some of you who are working as chaplains or, in any way doing front end work? A number of you are doing that, right? I know.
I have done it, yeah.
Right. So here's what I want to tell you. This is what I was taught. Theory is for the therapist and not for the client. Like talking philosophically about afterlife, sometimes when people all they need is somebody to hold their hand compassionately, was not working. That wasn't what I needed to do first. I needed to first hold their hand. I needed to offer compassionate support. I needed to use the wisdom of Jewish tradition. And yet having a perspective that consciousness survived bodily death, that we weren't simply bearing a body, but there was a soul in transition, that a person wasn't alone in doing their grief work, but there was some interconnection between the world of the living and the world of the dead, really made a big difference. So what I want to share with you, in a sense, is my harvest from having done this work now for 25 years or more, since it was 30 years ago or more that I started that job. Okay, so before I go forward, anyone comments, questions? I want to keep doing this interactively. So anybody want to comment on what I'm saying? This is just still my throat clearing and my intro.
I do.
Right, Tehila, go.
Yeah, because I didn't ask a question this before. I want to hear also about what to do with someone that died a long time ago, but we didn't really properly help them transition into the afterlife. Is it too late?
Good. The answer is never. The answer is that they're way ahead of you. They've already done the work. But when we come to that, when I talk about ancestors guiding us, you re-ask that question. Anyone else a question?
Yes. No,
Please, Maya.
a comment that I had a woman who for a year had difficulty with her husband dying, and I used your work to help her. And in the end, she was able to deal with the fact that her husband was never alone, never by himself, and that he was always there with her. That gave her a great deal of comfort to be able to go back and to be able to go. Actually, this was a year. So in the year, she was able to go back to the funeral, to the cemetery, do the unveiling, because without that knowledge, she couldn't do it.
All right. Well, I'm glad you could do it. And by then it was sharing with her your work, because if you integrate it, it's what you do. One more question, and then I'm going back onto the share screen. Anyone? Helena?
This has kind of haunted me all week. Two things. One, I won't go into the long story, but when my mom was in the hospital dying, I learned that a chaplain had not been called, so she never did the vidui. So I think we're going to talk about that, but
Good.
that always bothered me. And then the other thing is, I was saying Kaddish at Mount Sinai Hospital, which is a kind of ultra-Orthodox, and I mentioned that I talked to my mother, and the person in charge said to me, oh no, in Judaism, you're not supposed to directly address the person who died. And so since then it bothers me. I'll say, God, tell my mother, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I'll show you if I don't have it here. I have other texts. There's a whole tradition of talking to the deceased. Okay.
Wow, thank you.
Okay, so let's go to, here's where we are. Okay, so this is what if consciousness survives bodily death and death is a transition, so what do I do about that? So I want to start by telling you a story, okay? This is a story told about the death of the Baal Shem Tov. For those of you who do know, and for those of you who don't know, Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement, and it was Shavuot. He was at the end of his life, and people were all gathered around, and he was delivering his Torah about Shavuot with the same passion and same intensity that he had done throughout his entire life. And then he stopped, and he requested that members of the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, show up, and he had spent a little bit of time with them, asking them to saying to them what it is that he wanted them to do for him at the time of his death. And then he said, there are 2 clocks in this house. And when both those clocks have stopped, it will be the end of my time to be among you. And he was literally describing to everybody what he was experiencing as the consciousness was leaving the body, first through the extremities, going slowly, slowly, slowly. And then he stopped and he said, now I can no longer speak. And they looked, and one of the clocks on the wall had stopped. And they're watching him breathe in breath, out breath, in breath, out breath, no breath. And they looked, and the other clock in the room had stopped. And the time for the Baal Shem Tov to be among us had come to an end. And those who were present said they were able to see his soul. Those who were present at the time of his funeral were able to see his soul ascend in a flame of blue. And I share that story because I think we need a model of conscious dying and of sort of death as a transition, because the stories we hear, alachad kama v'kama, how much more so the difficulty of the stories we're hearing now with COVID-19 and people dying alone with only a Facebook image of a loved one that could see. But we need to harvest from our spiritual resources of Judaism a lens, an approach to dealing with the spirituality of the deathbed. So my sense is some of what we can take out of the afterlife teachings can help us to deal with that. So let me do a couple of texts. I want you to have your list of texts in front of you, and we're going to keep going. Somebody jump in. Last time I worked Shoshana so hard, but that's she ran away the next week. She didn't come back because of it. So somebody read this one, please. Okay, so this is what do we see of the Torah of, 2 weeks ago I talked about Jacob was gathered to his ancestors. It's very interesting. With Rachel's death, she dies in pregnancy. She dies in childbirth. Somebody want to read this?
Sure.
Go.
And it came to pass when Rachel was in difficult labor that the midwife said to her, "Fear not, you shall have this son also." And it came to pass as her soul was departing, B'tseit nafsha, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrat, which is,
And he quit the screen already. Which
yeah,
is
which
Bethlehem.
it is, whatever it says.
She left quickly. Anybody want to comment on that? Oh no, somebody's sharing. Lori Franklin, you're sharing your screen again. Okay,
Sorry.
good. It was not again. Somebody else did last week. Good, you caught that quickly. Thank you very much. You saved me the anxiety. I thought I had quit on you. Okay, so somebody want to talk to me about what you just read about Rachel's death? Nobody wants to say anything?
This is Gail,
Yeah, hi.
new to the group here. I think it's interesting that they said her soul was departing before she died, not that she died and her soul departed. They're saying the soul was departing because she had died. I guess it's an interesting way of saying it.
You know, we don't have an accurate language in our English anyways for departure of the soul at the time of death. We really don't. Does anybody know what the word goses is? Shoshana, what's the root of that word, you know? What? I'm going to unmute you. Go. No, I don't. You don't have your volume.
I don't know what the show is. Oh.
Yeah, go. What's goses?
I don't know what the shorish is, but a goses is a person in the throes of death.
Okay.
And Jewish law has certain laws about how we can handle that person. Or
good.
You know.
So let's go and see what Jewish tradition has to say about what's going on at the moment of death. Okay. So here I'm gonna take you from the 16th century to the 21st century. Shoshana, you're here. You read me the first one. This is Yored Deah is the Shulchan Aruch. It's state of the art. Okay, but it's state of the art 1600s. Okay, so this is what they have to say.
1563, 16th century. One in a dying condition is considered a living being in all respects. We may not tie up his jaws,
You're gonna do it again?
nor anoint him with oil, nor wash him, nor may we remove the pillow from under him, nor may we place him on sand, clay ground, or earth, nor may we hire pipes and lamenting women, nor may we close his eyes before his soul departs.
Anybody want to comment on this? These are the do's and the don'ts when somebody is dying. Why don't you hire?
No
what?
pushing.
Well,
Don't
why don't you hire pipes and lamenting women?
Because that would be too soon. And
How
okay,
often
so the why is interesting. But Rabbi Joseph Caro doesn't even want us, when the person is just sick, to even sit near his head, right? So
it's very different. We're not using this as a basis today.
Well, I understand, but he's a Kabbalist writing halakha, and his Kabbalism bleeds through into the halakha, which is fabulous. But we're not supposed to interrupt or manipulate this process, right?
So on one hand, we're respectful. We treat the person as a living being in all respects, but we don't want to do anything that would be upsetting to the physicality. And then you're saying also onto the spirituality. The reason why you don't hire pipes and lamenting women is because it's halachic that you have to hire somebody who plays flutes and women to lament when somebody dies. Just so you know, I'm all in favor of renew. Jewish Renewal needs to reclaim that. We need more
I
drumming.
think it has. It's on its way.
Now,
Bob,
read the
there's
one at the
also-
bottom. Somebody speaking? Read the one at the bottom, Shoshana.
Okay, sure. This is okay. Much of what
Wait,
occurs.
let me say what Kathleen Dowling-Singh is write this book, The Grace in Dying, How We Are Transformed Spiritually and as We Die. And what she's saying is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Dying is only the psychosocial dimension. We need to be much more aware of the inner transpersonal or spiritual experiences of what she calls the nearing death experience. Go.
Much of what occurs during the nearing death experience is beyond words, subtle and deeply inner. Intuitions, recognitions, experiences of realms of being and understanding, realms of depth and light and truth that words cannot grasp.
Anyone want to comment on that? Yeah, go.
I just want to say that apparently on the day my mother died, she turned to her aide and said, "I'm going to die today." And the aide, a Guyanese woman, said, "No, you're not, Ruth. What are you talking about?" But my mother was right.
Right. There, you know.
Well, I have something to say briefly.
Okay, go.
Is that I guess the part that's confusing to me is, aren't we always in that state of nearing death because we're alive, but isn't there a way to access these transcendental experiences before? What is the mark and the line between being alive and nearing death?
Okay, so look, the answer is metaphysically you're right, but pastorally there is a state of active dying. There is a sense that we get within the 24, 36 to 48 hours, and certainly the healthcare professionals will speak about that, where there are very obvious physical changes. What I'm suggesting is that the physical changes have a parallel of the inner dimensions. That's a nearing death experience that is exactly what we read in the Kabbalistic material. Okay, Bob?
And what of the person who dies suddenly from a trauma, gunshot, sword, whatever, sudden death?
Well,
how does the literature talk about that?
Let me hold it till I talk about the near-death experience, till the life review. Your answer is 3 slides ahead of me.
Okay.
So let's go back. I'm trying to, stay in both relationship and, okay, so somebody read this. Okay, now we've gone from the nearing death experience and the ICU or the hospice bed to 12th century Guadalajara, Spain. Somebody else jump in and read this, please. Bob, you started talking, so keep going.
It's small.
It's small?
It's small for older eyes.
You have it on the text in front of you all.
I got it.
So the
Lying
pictures
on
of us is covering the words for me.
I just had a moment.
Lying on the deathbed,
Deathbed.
preparing to leave the
All right.
world, she is granted an additional supernal spirit that she had never had before, and sees what she has never been worthy enough to see throughout her life. Because
Hold it a second. Somebody is not muted and there's a noise in the background. Please do that. I don't want to have to mute all. It's going to go. Okay.
Lying on the deathbed, preparing to leave the world, she is granted an additional supernal spirit that she never had before, and sees what she has never been worthy enough to see throughout her life. Because the additional spirit given to her, once this has been granted her and she sees, she then departs from the world. She departs from this world. Zohar 1:21, 218b.
Okay. First of all, I want to stop the share. Somebody has music on or something in the background. Anybody want to comment on that? And what does that have to do with the nearing death experience and companioning people when they die? Yeah, go, Lori.
Well, I just wanted to comment on one part of it. I'm not sure I'm ready to comment on the last part that you mentioned, but just let's see what happens. It strikes me that this additional soul is very much like the neshama yetira b'Shabbat. It's the idea, this additional soul that one gets on Shabbat. So it's a really interesting resonance with that idea.
Well, Shabbat is the taste of the world to come.
Yes.
Right. And the more we cultivate our own higher consciousness, like there's a story of a Buddhist teacher who is dying, and his teacher said, a Buddhist monk is dying, and his teacher says, "Come back, you're doing it all wrong." So the Buddhists taught them to hold their consciousness awakened and aware so that they can keep their consciousness awakened and aware in dying. What this text says to me, and I think it has practical applications in how we work with people, it says at the moment of death, for some people, Bob, not for everybody, but for some people, they are experiencing some higher frequency of awareness. The healthcare professionals would say, Mrs. Topolitsky is hallucinating. Mrs. Topolitsky is not hallucinating. Mrs. Topolitsky is in another dimension of reality. And what we need to do when we're accompanying people is be aware that there are other dimensions going on. And people have these sort of random experiences with a loved one dying, and I want to say, yeah, that's definitely what our tradition has been talking about for a long time. Okay, somebody else is coming in. We now have 2.5 minions. Okay, keep going on, and let's see where we go from the supernal vision of dying. Okay, is that what it is? Yeah, all right. So here's what I want to. If I need to move the ribbon, tell me. Okay, Bob, I'm answering your question now. Here's the truth. I don't really know in what order these things happen. Some of them I've seen happen on the deathbed as people are still conscious. Some may happen when people die quickly. It may be indifferent. But what I'm saying is there are a whole series of visionary phenomena that happen on the deathbed. This is both documented in near-death experience literature. It's in Zohar and other midrashic texts, and it's often reported anecdotally by people on the deathbed. So what the afterlife model suggests for pastoral care is we want to be present for people who are having these kind of experiences. So I'm going to do this. This is a review of what we did last week in Kabbalah. At the hour of one's departure from the world, their relatives gather round to accompany the soul where it is to abide. Oh, that's interesting. Angels are assigned to every human being, and every day they record the person's deeds so that everything he does is known to the Holy Blessed One. Everything is put down on their record and marked with a seal. Could that be the life review? Or this, when one departs this world, they give an account of all actions in this world where body and soul were still joined together. The mythic beings is the Shekhinah or somebody from the Federation, as I talked about last week. And right. So I want to stop for a second, and I want to answer your question more fully, Bob. It seems to be that in when there's a sudden death, it may be that all of these systems go on play automatically. It may be when there's a slow death, these may come in more slowly. I have been on the bedside of somebody who is dying, and they're literally reliving their childhood. So I'm wondering, are they having the life review well in advance of their death, or does it only happen at the moment of death? So I'm not sure of the timing, and I'm not sure that our 3D reality sense of timing is the same thing. All I say is these kinds of experiences are documented in our text, they're documented near-death experiences, they're reported anecdotally, and I think it gives us a different frame of how we accompany people. And I want to say more about that. Anybody want to comment? Yeah, please, Aggie, unmute yourself.
Okay. I've always wondered, and I hope I'm not taking us anyplace else. I want to talk about my mother's death.
No, I want you to ask a question.
There's a question within the story, if that's okay. If not, then I won't ask.
Okay, go.
So when my mother was a Holocaust survivor. She was the kind of person that really had no authority and very challenging life. And I never saw her as a strong person or as a leader or anything like that. At her death, and it's bizarre because I live in Milwaukee, she lived in Cleveland, and when I was
Aggie, briefly, please go. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to cut you off.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
But ask the question, but briefly.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. So I'm juggling 30 names here. Yeah, Joni. Unmute yourself. Go.
Yeah. So what I struggle with these images are all comforting and I love hearing them, but there's so much about our bodies in this world and, you know, moving into an afterlife that makes sense to us from being a physical person. And I guess the other point I think of is like not all of us are comforted by being with our families or our ancestors at death.
Yeah. Well, look, I have to present an ideal model, and I think you're right. I think you're right. I think, you know, some people it's like, you know, leave me alone, make the transition and go away and don't bother me.
Yeah, but the other part that comforts me is that there's like a belief there's a uniqueness for all of us in our experiences for what we need in some unknown form that's beyond this world. But this is like the place to start, and it's comforting for us in our bodies at this point.
And you know, I'm also speaking against the background of a Jewish world that was saying Jews believe in life and the living in the here and now. Remember that, you know, that's where we're starting from. So to be able to say we have, you know, we have a different way of thinking about afterlife and Jewish rituals once we have some sense of a belief about afterlife. So here's my pastoral model. These are, what do we need? Okay, so simply say I for 1 second you say all of that's going on. There's some kind of supernal awareness going on. What do I do with that? If it says no one leaves the world before they see the Shekhinah, and with the Shekhinah there come 3 ministering angels, what do we do about that? You validate the visions. We want to be able to, rather than, like if I say to somebody, Aggie, I'm apologizing because I want to hear it, but I'm looking at my clock and saying, I want to say, tell me what happened, because you're not making it up. Your mother wasn't crazy. They're not hallucinating. It's not from the drugs. It's not because of neurohormonal secretions. These things happen. So validate the visions and welcome the ancestors. I say this, who do you imagine being there for you at the end of time? People have some sense. Now I've had people who said, the last person I want to see when I die is my parent. You know, and I have to say, I've wondered about that. I mean, I've worked with people who were major trauma survivors who had major trauma with parents. And I often, I wanted to go see a psychic to see whatever happened with that person and their abusive parents. So I don't know about that. I once heard a doctor say, what we need to do with that patient is help her disidentify from the body. With all due respect to Meryl, who is a nursing practitioner and professor. I don't see your picture right now, but I know you're there. Often in the medical profession, they want to know, what went into your body and what came out of your body today, And so this doctor said, no, don't focus so much on her body, but help her disidentify from the body. And so music and meditation are ways of helping people experience some sense of an awareness other than physicality.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Gail. You are listing these, and I wonder if they are kind of like, people have said the stages of anger and so on are, or can these occur at different times?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think this is in any way progressive. I think these are all simultaneously going on. This is sort of Simcha's list. Based, if consciousness survives bodily death, what do we do about that? We help people validate the visions, welcome the ancestors, just to disidentify from the body. If people have a life review at the end of their life, we help them do legacy work while they're still alive. And conscious transition, we use our vidui. Somebody asked me a question of vidui. I'm going to say something about that. And psalms to help them. So what I'm really pointing towards is working with the dying. We become agents of helping the soul leave the body.
Excuse me,
Go.
may I speak?
Well, I want to just say I want to spread the wealth around. Anybody else want to comment? Okay, go.
My perception is that someone dying is extremely fortunate to have someone with them like you. I think this would be the exception, even having done hospital chaplaincy work. And so if you've got a person that doesn't believe in life after death, you've got family surrounding who doesn't believe in life after death or never thinks of it, and you have a person, chaplain, or even sometimes in the hospital you can't get a Jewish chaplain, or they don't even work that way. At least in Toronto, you go to different sections of the hospital rather than your own denomination, but you could request it. So does that, I'm thinking that doesn't make any difference in terms of what the reality is. But if most people don't even believe it, how effective are we at accompanying the person, and are they limited because of that?
Okay. So let me just, sometimes, Gabrielle, you had your hand up. You want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think that we don't have to use religious language or religious symbols. I think that there's a transition happening. And so, like, was stated earlier, like music, meditation, non-bodily, like easing people into a non-body focused consciousness, I think is part of the work. You don't have to use the word Shekhinah. You don't have to use the word ancestors, angels, or afterlife to engage that kind of process.
Yeah, right. Like I said, theory is for the therapist, not for the client. Sometimes I'm just holding somebody's hand and singing psalms, and that's all. And so that's comforting both for the person who's dying and for the family around. And for the family around.
Thank you.
Okay, Gail, you have your hand up? No, okay. So
yes, I did, but I asked a question already before. I've muted my live picture because I'm eating some lunch now.
okay, well, I hope it's good. I hope it's tasty. Listen, as you see, I'm both trying to give you sort of like the Jewish wisdom on it and describe and keep the conversation going. Okay, Shoshana, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'll just spit it out. Like, I'm taking this class for what you just shared, is what to do. Like, I have had many experiences leading me to believe these beliefs, and I want to know what I should do about that. And this is so this is such a compassionate path of what to do for people. And I have another question, which is, what should I do as a Jewish educator in the mainstream? Given that, this is normal for me, not just by reading books, but actually by experiencing things. So that's my quest, and that's why I'm sitting here again in your class, not just one time, but a second time. And I'll read the book.
Okay, and yeah, I want to talk to you about an education module I'm trying to do for high school students, and you work with that age group. So
I work with middle school, but I work with adults too. I mean, everybody needs this.
Okay, so here's very tactless. At the hour of departure of a person's departure from the world, they see a panoramic vision of all of the deeds of their life. So if that's the case, what do people need while they're still alive? They need to tell their story. There are different tasks of different stages of life, and part of the journey at the end of life is legacy work. So I would send my undergraduate students when I was teaching a death and dying class, I'd say, when you go home for Thanksgiving, pull out your iPhone and sit your grandfather or grandmother in front of the iPhone and ask them questions about their life. So this is from the work of a colleague of mine, Rabbi David Levin, is doing Conversations for Life and Legacy. That's the name of his website. So what were the highlights of your life growing up as a child, as a teenager, in your adult life? What are the memories you want to talk about? Who are the influences? Any regrets you have? How do you want us to remember you? What do you want your legacy to be? I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, but these are all available. There's all kinds of questions about ethical wills. So learning how to help people write their ethical will, doing video stories. I did 8 hours of interviews with both of my parents, long before they died. I started early. It was interesting. My father knew every single detail. My mother would say, "I don't remember. Go ask Daddy. He would remember." So I have that. At one point, there's a photograph. There's an image in there where I'm interviewing my father and my son walks in. So I have to go into that video, which I put into DVD, and just take that photograph out, because that's a treasure. So again, what I'm trying to do is take the philosophical stuff and turn it into a pastoral approach. So that's a piece of the work that, whether you believe in life after death or not, it doesn't matter. Help people tell the story of their life. Before I go back to the next screen, anyone else? Comments, questions?
Yeah, I will try to be really brief, but I want to make sure before this class ends that I ask the question in the right way, that there's all these tools and technologies for people who know they're dying. But to go back to Bob's question, my father died of a sudden heart attack out of the clear blue sky 20 years ago. Is it too late for me to help his soul go to where it needs to go? Like, what can we do after the fact? And for other people who...
Yeah, go on.
For other people that just didn't do these things before someone died, is there a way to do them after?
Here's my response. Al regel echad. It sounds like you have work to do in getting complete with your father. I imagine that your father got welcomed into the other side by his guides, and that he made the transition, and he's okay. Take care of it yourself. So my ani mamin is that most beings are able to make the transition, whether or not we're able to do this. Now, I have to say, when I was at Majdanek and I walked out of a gas chamber and I broke into nonstop coughing, and I could not stop coughing, and I lay down, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It was surreal because I was in a death camp, and Polish countryside was just verdant, and it was perfect. It was like 65 degrees. It was sunny. It was breezy. It was beautiful. And I'm joking. And I closed my eyes, and the sunlight's coming into my eyes. And I said, go into light, go into light, go into light, go into light, go. And it just disappears. So was that a Dybbuk that had grabbed onto me? It absolutely felt that way. And people have these experiences. There are souls. I once got a call from a woman who said her husband was possessing her. You know, when you write a book on Afterlife, you get some very interesting phone calls once in a while. And so I called my friend who is psychic, and she said, he's possessing her, but they've been doing this for years and years, and lifetimes and lifetimes. Keep away. So every good pastoral care worker needs a good psychic. But Tehillah, I want to say, your work is to be able to do the goodbye and I love you and I let you go, because I imagine that soul of after all these years is continuing on the journey. Okay, is that a good is that good enough for now? Anyways.
Well, maybe later you can tell me how to get rid of him possessing me.
Wait,
because I do
I'm
feel
not
like
going to
he's
do it in this
possessing
class,
me.
but call me and we'll talk.
I know. I said later.
Okay. Well, like I said, everyone needs a good psychic. Okay. So from here, now I want to talk about the vidui. Okay. So somebody read. This is the traditional understanding of the vidui. I can't see if my pictures are in your way. Shoshana, you have your hand up. I'll let you read. These are the Chevra Kadisha art from Prague. Okay, so this
I'll read.
This is probably again 1600s. Now notice, what do you notice about this picture for the vidui? Besides a bunch of old men.
Yeah, all men.
And
I know it's a minion. This is Gail. It's a minion with the person who's dying.
They have a candle.
In Renaissance Italy and other communities, they needed a minion to do the vidui. Okay, so go read this, please.
If one feels death, and this is the Shulchan Aruch, if one feels death approaching, they are instructed, confess your sins, and the person is told, many confessed their sins and died not, and many who have confessed their sins have died. And as a reward, should you confess, you will live, and one who confesses sins has a portion in the world to come. So this is the speech you give him. And if the person is unable to make confession with the mouth, they should confess in the heart. If they do not know what to confess, instruct the person to say, my death should be an expiation for all my sins.
Which in itself is a theology that's problematic for us today. Okay?
This is such good lawyering.
What it is that we're really in an age of creating a new approach to vidui. We lost touch with the vidui for a long time. For a long time, I thought confession was only what you saw the priest do on late night movies. You know, the old black and white movies. The priest would always be called in. We didn't, growing up for 30 years, I never knew the Jews even did a confession. But we're doing it. I want to recommend this book and a CD by this name, May the Angels Carry You. So somebody else want to read this? This to me is I think this is a little bit easier than the other one. I need another reader here. Merle, you want to read this for us? Okay, go.
Okay. Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, we acknowledge that all life is in your hands. May it be your will to send healing too. Yet, if the end is imminent, may it reflect your love and atone for all those times could have done better. Grant him or her the rewards of the righteous and give him or her eternal life in your presence. Guardian of the bereaved, protect and his or her beloved family, for their lives are interconnected in the bond of love. In your hand lives his or her spirit. You have redeemed him or her, Adonai, God of truth.
There's a lot of good vidui literature available on the web. Okay? These days, all we have to do is go to Reb Google and ask a question. And here's this one is a techina that my wife Gila Reza wrote for the deathbed. There's other stuff, and it sounds something like this. Oh, great guardian of the gateway between life and death, I come before you as witness to this sacred moment in time. In gratitude and with humility, I honor the mystery
of holy transitions. Just as Jacob buried his beloved Rachel on the road to Bethlehem, and his loving family surrounded Jacob and Joseph as they were gathered to their ancestors. May I gracefully escort this soul with compassion and love.
So there are all different ways of offering heartfelt accompaniment for the soul. There's the traditional liturgies, there's psalms, there's music. Get what was it? Somebody did an unveiling, and their grandfather was into big band music. So she played flute. She played big band music. Probably was into Gershwin. Whatever it is, if consciousness survives bodily death and death is a transition, how do we want to help people in the transition? It doesn't have to be formulaic. I'm trying to show you that what they said in Shulchan Aruch was great, but it's not 21st century. And there's a lot of resources available, both on the web from Reb Google, in music, singing, whatever it is, holding somebody's hand. There's ways of accompanying somebody. And now we're having to do it via Zoom and FaceTime. And Ritual Well has many interesting contemporary vidui. I didn't see what was lying on top of the bed. I missed. I haven't been reading some of your notes now. So, a way to explain the feeling we get when we encounter someone totally out of our experiences. Presence seems to tell us they've known us in another lifetime. The answer is that's a longer conversation. Okay, we're gonna go do grief work. I had a half hour to do 6 hours of exploring the grief journey. So actually, let me go back to share screen, and then we'll keep hearing some questions. Share screen. Is my screen sharing? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna skip this, go to death. So here's the summary. Death is a transition to the world beyond, and the way we companion somebody is very different than if it's just the death of the body. Now I want to tell you another story. I'm going to tell you this story. Story told of Prophet Elijah. A woman comes to Prophet Elijah, and she's carrying. I'm going to go off the screen again. She's carrying in her arms a dead child with the passion that only a mother who has ever, God forbid, buried a child can have. And she says, Prophet Elijah, can you bring my child back to life? And he says, I will, but I want you to first bring to me a loaf of bread from a home in which there's never been shed tears of grief. So the woman goes to the first house, knocks on the door, and says, do you have a loaf of bread? And they say, oh, I have a loaf of bread. Sure, what else? Have ever there been shed tears of grief? Well, as a matter of fact, and they invite her in, they tell their story, she tells her story, and it says, thank you very much. And she goes to another house, and do you have a loaf of bread? We have a loaf of bread. Have there ever been shed tears of grief in this house? Well, as a matter of fact, and again, they tell their story. She shares her story, and she goes to another house, and another house, and another house. She comes back to Prophet Elijah, and she says, thank you very much, for you have given me the gift of my humanity. I share that story, realizing I only have a half hour now, because we've all had to live with grief. Okay, and Jews do grief very well. We have a lot of very valuable grief rituals. People need to learn them. That's why I call my organization Da'at, Death Awareness Advocacy and Training. I'm also interested in advocating for education for people. But we think differently about death rituals if we start with the assumption that I've been teaching, that there's a connection between the living and the dead after death. So here is, I'm going to do a couple of slides quickly just to give you a context. This is the grief journey al regel echad. You know, there's a lot of different ways, but the initial shock and denial, you know, I can't even believe it happened. People are numb, people are zombies. Then facing the painful truth is when the reality starts to come in. You come home and there's nobody home, or Thanksgiving comes and you know, and your mother isn't making the Thanksgiving dinner, or there's different ways in which, you know, people have the hardest time. You know, April 15th is a hard time for widowed women. You know why? Because the husband always handled the taxes, and they suddenly have to do it on their own. You know, so that's facing the painful truth. Putting the pieces together is one day at a time. You know, you 3 days, three steps forward, 2 steps back. Slowly you begin to acclimate, and then saying yes to life is when you take on a new project, a new relationship, if that happens, grandchildren, etc. So that's a quick model. But what I want to show you is that this model of the transformation of grief is parallel to what goes on with the Jewish death rituals. So the instant shock and denial is what happens, what people are during funeral and Shiva. Facing the painful truth, Shiva, it happens, Kaddish, the Shloshim, I'm going to say something about that. The first year is a slow rebuilding of a life, putting the pieces together. The Yortzeit, it's not all together, and Yisker, you know, life goes on. You with me so far? Anybody want to comment on this? I mean, I'm just giving you a schema, but I'm going some. Yeah, please. Go.
One of the things that I experienced, I separated from my husband in the end of 2011. He died at the end of October 2014. And when I was with my children planning his funeral, to which there were 150 attendees from all over the country. They said, oh, we're not going to do any Shiva because Dad wouldn't want it. And afterwards, I realized that I should have held my ground and said, we have to do Shiva because it's not for him anymore. That's for us.
Yeah. Well,
and even though I separated from him, you know, we still had a connection. We were still on speaking terms and everything else. And so it's like I understand this process, and that's one of the things that even 6 years later, 5 years later, I regret that I didn't encourage my children to do that.
That's all I was asking is, can't we do it now?
Yes. The grief work continues. You don't have to sit Shiva, but the bereavement work continues. The work, what's the work? The work is saying goodbye. So
right, but isn't there a Jewish context that we could have
well,
the Shiva that we didn't have then?
You know what? Let me let me stop here and talk to you about this. The questions you're asking, you're asking to the wrong person. If you want a halachic answer, go to an Orthodox rabbi in Toronto and ask them a halachic question. If you're asking me a psychological, I come from a psycho-halachic place, and I want to say the issue is that you have incomplete bereavement, then you have to find your way to do the incomplete. If you want to sit Shiva, if you want to do a memorial service, if you want to, what are your needs of the heart? That's the question that I ask, because halachically, you don't have to do that now. But you need
thank you.
But you need to go ask somebody for whom the halachic issue is more is closer.
I don't really care about that. I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Well, so what? It's a longer conversation, but I would say start with writing a letter to your father. Somebody just wrote,
I will talk later. We'll talk later.
Vision he had of his friends since early.
May I ask something?
No.
Or comment?
Hold on 1 second. I want to go back to what I was doing here because I'm
Sorry. Okay.
I need to give you this context to work with. So this is what we did before. These are the stages of grief on the left side. Right, the initial shock and denial, the pain of grief, putting the pieces together and saying yes to life. These are the rituals from Shiva to Kaddish to Yizkor and Yortzeit, and these are the stages of the journey of the soul. So suddenly, what we're seeing is that there's a connection between the grief process, Jewish death rituals, and the stages of the afterlife. And this is my assimilation of this material. This is, this is inherent in the tradition, but I'm sort of bringing together Shulchan Aruch and Kabbalistic psychology and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So if you want to ask your question based on this model, I invite you to do that. Okay, go.
I think it's just a simple question as to, unless I went by me, does the person who died have a connection in this world where they know what's going on, where they see us? I often go to the grave and I'll say, you're a great grandfather now, and I'm thinking, well, does he already know that?
Okay.
So from
good.
the other
Well,
side, do they watch?
Let me hold the question and let me stop coughing.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I'm going to sort of allude to it. I'm not sure I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
Some of you have
Thank you.
questions. I want to cover a little more material. So I want to go back to the screen share, and what I'm trying to do is walk you through some of the stages of the journey of the soul and ask what happens. Okay. So this, you know what Aninut is? Aninut is the period between the moment of death and the funeral. Okay? Somebody, and this is Shulchan Aruch, an onain, someone who's in Aninut, who suffered a bereavement, does not eat reclining, he does not eat meat or drink wine, nor does he recite the benediction before meals, nor does he say grace after meals. It's saying before the funeral, you're in a hyperacute state of grief. Be aware of that. You with me so far? Because now I'm going to take a leap. And then the Zohar says for 7 days the soul wanders to and fro from his house to his grave, from his grave to house, mourning for the body. The Shulchan Aruch says you're in a hyperacute mourning stage. You have to accept the reality of death, help people prepare for the funeral. For rabbis, you got to write the eulogy. There's the Chevra Kadisha, that. But what's the spiritual significance of that? Observe synchronicities, watch your dreams, notice sense of presence. He said, and then you said, what does that mean? And I want to say, if consciousness survives bodily death, that period after death is one of the possibility, not the inevitability, but the possibility of there's some connection with the soul sticking around. So somebody says, there's a funeral next week, tomorrow. I say, go sit quietly and open up to what it is that's going on in your heart, in your conversation with the person who has died. Zohar says for 7 days, the soul goes to and fro from his house to his grave. My experience tells me that sometimes people have these incredible synchronistic experiences or dream experiences or meaningful coincidences. Pay attention to those. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it happens. I'm not saying it has to happen. I'm saying be aware and pay attention. That's really what anyone want to comment? Yeah, please. Marla.
I have a question. Is that why Rachel named Benjamin Ben-Oni? Is it because of Aninut?
No. Ben-Oni, that's interesting. No, it's Binyamin. Jacob mentions him.
Jacob named him Benjamin, but she called him Ben-Oni, and I'm wondering if it's because she was about to die.
That's interesting. I have to look at that. I think that could be right. I don't know. Yeah.
And the onen is the person bereaved, not the person dying, correct?
An onen is the person is the bereaved person, right? I call it hyper.
And so another another question about that. Why wouldn't that person say grace after meals? What would be why?
It's like you're exempt from all mitzvah taseh.
You have one mitzvah.
You just don't have to do that. It's
You
not
have
that
one mitzvah to do.
You have one mitzvah to do. What's
You
the
have
mitzvah
one
to do?
mitzvah to do,
To
which
wait
is
for the
bury your dead.
Bury your dead, right? So
And
all
create the
your-
eulogy.
but you're not exempt from mitzvah lot taseh. You can't go and commit murder. That doesn't you don't get away with that. Lori?
And I'm just remembering that Brachot, Tractate Brachot has something about that too. Not only, also exempt from Shema and Tefillah, because
all
you
commandments.
just don't have the kavana to do it.
Right.
Because there's only one thing that's in front of you when your dead lie before
But you can't bury on Shabbat. And so if there's Shabbat that happens before the burial, does that mean that you're exempt from observing Shabbat?
No.
No. No. Okay. Soul dimensions of the funeral. Rav told his colleague, Rabbi Samuel ben Shilat, be fervent in my funeral eulogy, for I will be standing there. All right, that's it's like so. What's the work of the funeral? Is sending a soul on the journey, forgiveness, silence during a eulogy. For some of you who write a eulogy, I always say, when we want to take a moment for a second and allow an image of the person who we're burying to come to mind, and let's send them on their journey with love. And then I hold a silence for 10, 15 seconds. So it's saying like, let's send them on the journey. That's the work. The liturgy is really about Aliyat HaNeshama. In Sephardic liturgy, they do 7 circumambulations around the coffin, and it's sort of to elevate the soul. So I want to make sure that I have the soul continue on its journey before you pull the plug on me at 5:30. So I'm going to keep going on. I'm going to talk about Shiva for a minute. So Shiva is like, wow, that was some Shiva. That was great food, right? But from a spiritual perspective, Shiva is a soul guiding ritual. And we want to make more time for silence. My wife, when she does the Shema during the evening service, she says, let's take a minute. What are you listening? What are you hearing? What are you hearing? So be aware that, again, if we imagine Shiva to be a sense where the worlds interact with each other, this is not law. This is not legislative directions. These are intuitive directions. I'm talking about learning pastoral approaches by being simply aware and noticing what your own experiences are and being willing to share and invite people to share their own experiences, because people do have these kind of experiences and there's nobody to talk to about them.
Simcha, this is Chaya. Can I just ask, my understanding, yes, the Shiva is a time to grieve, but isn't it also a time to share stories and experience the person and connect with the love that they might have, or the kavod that you might have for the person?
They're not mutually exclusive.
It's not necessarily, so I'm sorry, go on.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
What do we do at the end of Shiva? Well, so I want to give you, Shoshana says, I want some very practical things. I want to give you this too. What do you do at the end of the Shiva? At the end of the funeral.
You walk around the block.
When you leave the Shiva house,
You
walk around the block. And psychologically, we walk around the block because the person is getting back into life. But spiritually, it's walking the deceased, the soul of the deceased, onto their journey. So this is, B'Shem Omra, my wife taught me this one, and it's written up in the chapter in this book called Afterlife and the Renewal of Jewish Death Rituals, which is some of what this is based on. Her father died, and it was during Parshat Vayechi when Jacob is gathered to his ancestors. So before we walked around the block, she said, "Who are the ancestors to whom my father is being gathered?" And we named our loved ones, our friends who had died. My father-in-law's first cousin was there, and he named their mutual grandmother. And then we began to walk around the block. And so it was almost as if we were escorting him, his soul, to meet up with those beings on the other side. Did we really do that? I don't know, but did it give meaning to and depth to what we were doing, ending the Shiva? Yes. So I know I think all of those things that we do in Shiva, we continue to do, but to hold the possibility of other dimensions only adds a dimension to it. It doesn't take away. Okay, Gail, did you want to ask me something?
Excuse me, it takes me a moment to unmute. No, that was a previous question, but I did have something that I wanted to ask again, and that is, many times when we're doing something like Tahara or we're sitting, we have a feeling that sometimes there is a presence there, and other times absolutely not. My dear mother, departed mother, said, you know, if I can get in touch with you, I will let you know somehow. But she says, but I think I'll be too busy to bother to do that. And she was too busy to bother to do that because I never got any indication that she was, in a life to come.
I think some souls move on much more quickly and some souls move on more slowly. Yeah.
May I say something?
Who is that?
Whimsy.
Go. Right.
So to underscore what you're saying, Reb Simha, there was a rabbinic ruling back in the day that if there are two deaths and one house is full of mourners and the other house has no mourners, and there's only enough people for one minyan to do Kaddish, that the minyan should go to the house with no mourners to be there for the soul.
Okay.
So I think it underlines what you're saying about the soul going back and forth, being there, and the importance of there being something, whatever we can do here to help support that.
If you know where that is, let me know.
Yeah, I'll look for it.
I'd love to know that. Okay, folks, I want to, hang on, let's see where I am now. I am here. Okay, so I want to, I just have, okay, I have to, okay. Shloshim. Somebody read the bottom part first, please. Am I shared? Am my screen shared? Yes.
According
to
rabbinic law, a mourner should observe some of the mourning practices for, looks like 30 days. Which source did our sages use as a support for the concept of 30 days? Deuteronomy 21:13 states, and she shall cry for her father and mother for a month. That's from actually having a captive woman.
Yes.
Implied is that a mourner will feel discomfort for a month.
Okay, so look, that's halachic thinking, but it is the whole sense of shloshim, 30 days. It's a slow, gradual re-entry into life, and from a psychological point of view, if somebody says like it's 2 weeks since the Shiva and I'm totally confused, and I say, listen, you're in shloshim, you got to give yourself some cut yourself some slack. But here's the spiritual parallel to that. You read this next thing, please. Same person.
In each case, a proclamation resounds, saying...
No, in Lower Gan Eden.
I'm sorry, I have to move the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, there it goes. In Lower Gan Eden, there is a repository of all soul garments, inscribed with all the good works done by a person, which, while embodied in this world. And in each case, a proclamation resounds saying, this garment belongs to so-and-so, after which the soul of the person in Gan Eden is clothed in such a garment so as to become a replica of the person's personality whilst in this world. This takes place not less than 30 days after a person's death. For the first 30 days, there's no soul that does not have to undergo some type of purification before entering Gan Eden.
Okay, so look, I'm not sure exactly how this happens, okay? You know, this is still speculative stuff. I'm still among the living here. I don't remember since the last incarnation. But what our tradition says is that there's the possibility of some kind of transition that happens as early as 30 days, where we take off our terrestrial garments and we don our celestial garments. We sort of shake off the schmutz and the karma of physical embodiment, and then we're able to ascend to a higher level of being. So what I want to say is, like what we're doing in grieving is we're continually saying goodbye to the soul. That's what we're doing. You know, a successful bereavement is the ability to love and to work, holding the person in our heart in a tender kind of way. So it takes a little while, and so shloshim is both a marker of the grief journey and also a sense of movement of the soul.
Actually, I really have an emergency.
Somebody has their phone on, and it's not helpful right now. Okay, I got 10 more minutes. I'm going to give you a couple of more, and then we're going to come in for a landing. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so same thing with Kaddish. Okay, I'm going to the story about the Kaddish is a midrash. I can't tell if where my screen is blocking the words. Where Rabbi Akiva saw this kind of ghoul-like figure, and he says, "What's going on?" He says, "My son was never taught how to say Kaddish, and so I'm stuck in here." So he teaches his son how to say Kaddish, and it helps him go on the way. And last week, if you were here, you heard me do my sort of Gehenna Kaddish rap. What is it that I want to say? What's the conversation in your heart and your mind with the person who has died? Because my own interest in afterlife started when I was a little child, and they told me my grandmother died, and they said she went to heaven. So I figured she went to heaven, so I can talk to her in heaven. I was this dreamy little kid, and I talked to her for years. I remember. And I think what I learned is the human heart has attachments of love to the people who have died. And afterlife helps us to honor the attachments of our hearts. So Kaddish is a way of kind of continuing to work the attachments of the heart. We want to have them so that they don't hold us back, but that we still feel the connection. Do you feel close, or do you feel distant from people you love? What Jewish tradition says is our loved ones are in another dimension, but we're not completely cut off from them. And I think that's what I've been trying to teach all these years, and teaching about life after death, and kind of help people to feel that themselves. Anybody want to comment, question? I got 8 more minutes, and I'm not going to leave you, and I got to take you back through the afterlife, back into this world.
My question is how do I take what you're teaching? Because I'm also dealing.
Who's talking?
Chaya.
Okay, I don't see you. Go.
I'm dealing with right here. I'm dealing with people who were Christians or don't believe in Judaism. So how do I bring this into either the secular or the Christian as I'm working with these?
I think a question is, if your father could hear you, what would you want to say to him? It's almost like in Gestalt therapy. Sometimes it's very simple. What's the conversation in your heart and your mind with the person who has died? So you don't have to get metaphysical about it. you want to extract it. And sometimes what they need to say is, damn you, I'm pissed off at you. And you need to be able to hear that. What I find is sometimes people have both love and anger. We want to be able to help them cleave and say, okay, well, can you speak as the loving son and now speak as the angry son, or as the loving daughter, or husband, or, so it's really helping people identify the conflict and giving voice to the different pieces. And that has nothing to do with whether you believe in afterlife or whatever. Because in traditional Christian theology, when you die, you're automatically resurrected in Christ. Some of this stuff of the journey of the soul is not in normative Christianity. Some people don't have this. So, as I've said before, my biggest fear is when I die, I'll find out I was wrong. But we'll see. Okay. A couple of more, and then I think we'll call it quits on the day and see what else. Okay, so Yisker. Here's what happens. This is my other Yisker slide. Wait, this is my Yisker slide I want to use. Our tradition says that eventually souls on the other side become available to us as ancestors, as intercessors. So we have a whole tradition that speaks of how the deceased can be, not only we have to help them transition, but that they come and can watch over us. So in Fiddler on the Roof, Fruma Sarah comes and she says, I have an opinion about my granddaughter's marriage. In Lurianic Kabbalah, they go to the grave of Isaac Luria and they ask Luria to intervene. Luria would send his Hasidim, his Kabbalistic students, to go and do all of these practices to attune to the souls of these rebbes and have them work on their behalf. So reciting Kaddish at the time of I missed Yortzeit. Reciting Kaddish at the time of the Yortzeit helps elevate the soul to a higher level. I'm jumping, but I want to come in for a landing here in a minute. I'll save this. I'll save this for a second. I got one more last slide, but we got a few more minutes. So initially, and hang on, where am I still? Did I stop my screen share? Yes, your screen share. No, stop the share. Okay, so now we've just moved to a whole other dimension where we have these ancestors who are there to watch over us. And somebody said you're not allowed to pray to directly. There are late medieval, early modern prayers where it's direct exactly to the deceased. There's a whole tradition in Judaism where there's one prayer I put in one of my other presentations, in the Yisker talk I did for Kavod V'Nichum, where the guy goes to the cemetery of his deceased wife and says, bless my family and watch over our children together. That's not even subtle. That's very, very, very clear. Isaac Luria has people asking specific petitions from the Rebbes. What's the work of the Lubavitcher Rebbe with the Kvitlach, where they go to the grave? It's again believing that those beings on the other side can intercede. So we have that whole tradition. So to end, and then we'll see. We got a few minutes. I'll stick around also. Stop share. No, okay. So I'm in screen share now. This is the bottom line. Between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall. If you don't remember anything from any of those 3 classes I've taught you, but if you hold this one, between this world and the world beyond is a window and not a wall, then you have gotten Simcha Raphael, Jewish Views of the Afterlife 101. And on that note, I want to say I'm glad to have been able to share this with you. And I'm still able to stick around. But that, my friends, is what I have to say about biblical, rabbinic, Kabbalistic, and contemporary views of the afterlife journey of the soul. So I'm available if you want to check in some of the stuff on my website. I have some articles I've written. You can buy my books through there. If you want to talk to me or send to me people to talk to me about what counseling would be, I do bereavement work, and I always encourage people to find a good psychic if you're not sure of some of these questions. Okay, with that,
What's your contact information?
I sent it earlier, my email, so you have that, and just look up Simcha Raphael. You'll get the website.
Okay.
Anyone comment?
Okay,
Question?
thank you.
Listen, if let me just say this.
Can you save this chat?
Yeah, it's gonna be saved.
Can you save the
I don't know.
chat
I don't know
because
about
there's
the
all
chat.
that information?
I don't know about the chat. I don't know about that. That you're gonna have to find
The
out.
bottom 3 dots in the chat room. The bottom 3 dots saves it.
Okay. Hang on.
Rabbi,
Yeah, right. If you go ahead and click on the bottom 3 dots or the top 3 dots, it depends on your computer, you'll get something that says Save Chat, and just click on that. It'll save it.
Yeah, I see that, but I don't see it. Okay.
You'll save it in your downloads.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
I would like to say thank you. This course has been all that I could have hoped for and more. It's been amazing. Thank you.
By Simcha, do some souls stay around, like the
Yeah,
Auschwitz
I'm here.
experience? I think.
There's a, what was that question?
Some souls stick around and not, continue on, like at Auschwitz.
Some cases the soul sticks around, and some cases, I mean, I think Reb Zalman said we have to go to Auschwitz and places like Gettysburg and that to help. There's some souls sticking around, and then there's another whole thing on reincarnation, and souls get stuck, and some reincarnation. I just want to say, wait, somebody is not muted, so just make sure you're muted, please. The other thing I wanted to say, if any of you are involved in congregational life, I'm doing this kind of teaching. Obviously, if I'm traveling around, I go and do this, but I could also do this kind of stuff in different places. So please keep me in mind, and I want to say, I just want to say, Yitkadal Yitkadash Shemei Rabba B'Yamad Yivrak Yirusei V'Yamlich Machusei B'Chayechon V'Yamechon V'Chayechol Beit Yisrael B'Galav Zman Kari V'Imru Amen Yehei Shemei Rabba B'Horach L'Olam V'Amei Amaya Yitbarach V'Yishtabach V'Yitbar V'Yitramam V'Yitnasei V'Yitadar V'Yitalam V'Yitabrichu Leila Min Kol Birchata V'Shira Tatush B'Chata V'Nechem Hatada Miram V'Yamav V'Ru Amen Yehei Shlam Rabba Mishmaya V'Chayim Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Imru Amen Shalom Shalom Aleinu V'Yakol Yisrael V'Yakol Yoshvei Tevel V'Imru. Amen. 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 Okay.
Amen.
Rabbi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I should have just waited to contact you later, but
okay. Well, let's. Anyone else? Other.
Just a PR for Kavod Nikum on October 15th. Rabbi Simcha will be doing the session on Journey of the Soul in the World Beyond Wisdom from Kabbalah. So if you go to jewish-funerals.org, you'll be able to find more information about the short course in October that Rabbi Simcha will be teaching.
Right, which will be renewed. It always comes out differently every time. So, anyone else? Comments? Questions? Okay, friends. Thank you very, very much. I've had fun doing this, and just love the people around you. Shower the people you love with love. I guess that's my closing.
Thanks very much. Cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you all. And thanks to all of you for giving me the opportunity to do this.
can you just not close even if you need to leave so that we can try to figure out how to save the chat?
Sure. I don't.
Because there's a lot of important information in there, and I can't figure it out on my phone.
I saved the chat. I don't know where it's going to end up, but we'll see.
All right, maybe Stephanie.
I just saved the chat. You got check.
Thank you.
Okay.
Stephanie. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.